Good morning, AP World. It's a great day to be alive, and it's a great day to learn about the Protestant Reformation. Yes, sirree. Let's go on and get started as I work on improving my technological skills today. See if I can do a little better today. So we learn about the Protestant Reformation, and the Protestant Reformation. It's a kind of a really big step in world history where we kind of start making that step. We're in the medieval days of Europe. We're kind of taking that step, moving towards the Renaissance, and then eventually this is one of those kind of major steps that starts, leading us into the Renaissance and kind of turn the world to modern days. We know what it is. Kind of turns the world to modern days. We know it. So let's move on. So before we get anything, what was Europe like before the Reformation? So at the days of the Reformation, leading up to it, if you was a Christian and you was European, then by default you were Catholic. The only other kind of Christian church at the time is the Eastern Orthodox Church. That's mostly in, kind of like the Baltic, the Byzantine Empire, they're Eastern Orthodox. Russia is Eastern Orthodox. But, like Western Europe, Spain, Great Britain, France, Holy Roman Empire, they're all Italy, well, the Italian states, they're all Catholic at this point. And you know, at this point in history, the Catholic Church is really powerful and also really corrupt. It's like I want to, before we get into all this, all the bullet points, I want to look at this picture right here. And this picture literally says it all. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That's what this picture is. So we see kind of, you look at it on top, you see the Pope. That's the Pope right here in the middle, all the clergy. So they're the top of the kind of like the power pyramid. And here in the middle, we have, it looks like a king and all his knights. So that's the king, nobility. And at the bottom is the common people. That's you and me. We're just common people. And so that's kind of like the power structure. So, like, it is this that kind of leads us to the idea that the Pope is the king of kings. Like, the kings rule countries. Well, the Pope rules the whole Christian world or the whole Catholic world. And so, like I said, the church is really corrupt. It's like some examples of the church's corruption at this point. So the first thing is the sale of indulgences. And so what that is, the Catholic Church has this belief that, to get into heaven, you have to be pretty much like sinless. Well, nobody's sinless. We're all human. So where do we go? You got some sin on you, so you can't go straight to heaven. But you're not bad enough to go to hell. So where do you go? You go to purgatory. And so purgatory, your soul goes there to kind of, it's like your soul goes to purgatory to be purified. And so what the church does, they sell these indulgences, Maybe you had a family member that just died, or maybe they died a while back and you're still praying for them. So you buy these indulgences from the church, and you make a little church donation, you buy these indulgences, and like they'll pray for you, and it shortens your loved one's time in purgatory. Well, kind of think about it, how much longer they got? Father, they got 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. How much longer do they have in purgatory? You don't know. So what do people do? Well, might as well play it safe and just keep buying more indulgences to speed up their time in purgatory. Another thing that the church does is the sale of relics. It's like a relic. It's like a body part or like something that belonged to a saint. So it can be, I have St. Paul's ear, or I got, one of St. John's teeth, or I have St. Mary's heel bone, or a piece of a piece of one of their robes. I got his sandal. Like little things like that. Those are relics. And the idea behind relics is, you know, you have enough of them, like you shorten your own time in purgatory. Well, the problem is there's only a finite amount of relics in the world. And well, the churches want to make money. Like they're wanting to make that money. And so they kind of fabricate relics. Like, yeah, that bone, that's 100% uh St. Matthew's ankle bone. I guarantee it. Well, at this point in the world, at this point in time, St. Matthew must have had 20 ankles because there's a whole bunch of his ankle bones. Or there's a whole bunch of relics. There's some, nobles that would have 3,000 relics just to kind of like guarantee they won't be in purgatory for real long. And then another thing, probably the Catholic Church's most powerful tool during the day was their use of excommunication. So if you went against the church, you kind of went against their teachings, you challenged them in any way, they could excommunicate you. And what that means is they've kicked you out of the church. You're no longer a part of the Catholic Church, and without being a part of the Catholic Church, you're going to hell. Like, you're not going to get to heaven without us. Like, you need us to get to heaven. So if we excommunicate you, like, you're done. Like, you're a lost cause. And this is the tool. It's because of excommunication. This is what makes the Pope the King of Kings. This is why this picture is painted the way it is, where, the clergy's on top, third of the king, like third of the power of all Europe, is because if, say, a king, went against the Pope, he could excommunicate their whole country. And you tell a king, like, if you tell the people they're all going to hell because of their leader, that's not going to sit well with them. They're going to rise up and kind of revolt. And this does happen. Like, I don't remember the exact year, but there was one time the Holy Roman Emperor, he went against the Pope. He did something, he angered the Pope. So the Pope excommunicated, the entire population of the Holy Roman Empire. Well, this didn't sit well with them, and they started kind of rising up against him. It caused a lot of unrest in the Holy Roman Empire. And so the Holy Roman Emperor was forced to go to Rome and beg, like, get on his knees and beg for a confession. He wanted to confess his sins so he'd get right with the church. And he did. The Pope brought him back in, and everything ended up being okay. But, like, this just kind of goes to show how powerful the Pope is and why Europe is the way it is at this time. So anyway, we kind of move along to Martin Luther. Now, he is the key man to the whole Protestant Reformation. Without Martin Luther, I don't know if it probably would still eventually happen, but he's the guy that kicks it off. So, Martin Luther, he's not the first guy to go against the Catholic Church, but he's the one that really gets the ball rolling. Because of Martin Luther, because of him, the Reformation happens. Like, he gets it rolling, and everything just kind of escalates after him. So, Martin Luther, he was actually a law student, and then the story goes is he was caught in a thunderstorm one day, like a really bad storm, on his walk home. He prayed to God, said, God, if I survive this storm, if you allow me to survive this storm, I promise, I'll become a monk, and I'll dedicate my whole life to you. And he does. He drops out of law school after this. He becomes a monk, and eventually becomes a professor at the University of Wittenberg in the Holy Roman Empire. And when he becomes a monk, he like goes hardcore into studying the Bible, studying the scriptures. And anyway, he's reading through the Bible, he's studying the Bible, and kind of comes across a problem. And he comes across a problem with some basic Catholic doctrine. So in the Catholic Church believes that you're saved, you go to heaven through faith in God, Jesus Christ, and your own good works. And you need both of them. Well, Martin Luther's reading the Bible, and he's realizing that, according to the scriptures, you don't need good works to get to heaven. You only need faith. Faith alone will get you to heaven. In Martin Luther's view, the human being is just a weak, powerless, sinful thing, and there's nothing we can do on works to get us to heaven. It's through God's mercy, it's through our own faith that we get to heaven. well, this is a big deal. He's challenging long-standing Catholic doctrine, and Catholic Church won't stand for nothing like that. They don't stand for people going against them. And so anyway, Martin Luther, he goes up to this church in Wittenberg in Germany, and he goes to this church, and he nails his 95 thesis on the door of the Catholic Church. This 95 thesis, this is everything he believes is wrong with the Catholic Church, from only needing faith alone to get to church, to the whole Catholic corruption, the sale of indulgence. That's probably one of his biggest things against the church is its corruption, the sale of indulgences. And, he lists all these criticisms on a piece of paper and nails it to the church door. And well, if there was Twitter, back in the 16th century, this would be trending. This would be trending number one in the Holy Roman Empire, because this gets printed, this goes viral. Everyone's, a lot of people reading it. And what's funny is when Martin Luther's doing this, he don't intend, like, when he first does this, he's not intending to break away from the church in the beginning. Like, that's why it's called Reformation. He's trying to reform the Catholic Church. He posts this to be like, hey, this is wrong, like, let's fix it. And the reaction to Martin Luther's 95 Thesis is big. Like I said, it's widely printed, widely circulated, and eventually things move from, let's reform the church, let's fix the church, to that next step of let's break away. By 1520, Martin Luther began, calling on German princes to overthrow the papacy, overthrow the church, and establish a new reformed German church. And before I get into this, again, I want you to look at this picture here. When I say, Martin Luther began calling on German princes, well, the Holy Roman Empire isn't like one country. It isn't like, England, where it's just England, or France is just France. The Holy Roman Empire is made up of hundreds of little kingdoms. That's why, I have this map up here because, even myself, when I was a young student studying, European history, I kind of struggled to understand that. There's a Holy Roman Emperor, that's the emperor of all of it, but it's still broken up, and there's like little bitty kings and queens and all that, like royalty through all of the Holy Roman Empire. So there's all these little bitty kingdoms. And so, Martin Luther begins calling on all these German princes to, like, hey, let's overthrow the papacy. Let's break away from Rome and start our own new church. And he starts gaining the support of a lot of these princes. He gains the support of a lot of the royalty and a lot of the different kings and queens and princes, all throughout the Holy Roman Empire. And like I said, Martin Luther, he's not the first man. He's not the first person to question the Catholic Church, but the reason he's the one that gained so much traction and gained success is because of the Gutenberg printing press. It's like, like I said, remember I said his 95 Thesis became widely printed and circulated throughout, the whole Roman Empire and eventually Europe and all that. Well, that's because of the Gutenberg printing press. It's the first printing press with like movable tiles. So instead of like carving out, one sheet, you carve out all the letters, you just can only stamp the same thing. It's the first one with like movable text. So you can print something, change text around, print the next page. And so, using the Gutenberg printing press, Martin Luther is able to print the Luther Bible. And this is a big deal. So in the days, just of the Catholic Church, domination before the Gutenberg printing press and all that, Bibles were only printed in Latin. Well, not only is a lot of people in the Holy Roman Empire illiterate to begin with, but they don't really speak or read, definitely don't read Latin, they don't speak Latin. And so the only way for them to learn about the Bible, to get their holy teachings and all that, is to go to church and rely on the priest telling you. So they was, they had to go to church. They were relying on the priests. And so the big deal about the Luther Bible is it's the first mass-produced Bible that's written in German. So for the first time, there's a Bible available for the masses, for everyone to read the Bible on their own and interpret things on their own. That's kind of the thing about Martin Luther is, his whole Reformation started from him reading the Bible and like getting hardcore in scriptures. So that's like his teachings. He's telling people, read the Bible for yourselves, teach yourselves, and this is really a big deal. Anyway, Martin Luther's Reformation, like I said, spreads across the Holy Roman Empire, and it even starts a war. So his movement inspires a lots of people, and in 1524, peasants across the whole Roman Empire, they read this. They read, the 95 Theses. They get into his Reformation, and they become inspired. They start rising up against their own, landlords. They rise up. This is still kind of the day of the feudal systems. Like they're rising up, and full out revolting, violence. And they look to Martin Luther. He's the guy that inspired, in their eyes, inspired them. They look up to Martin Luther's for support. And kind of to their dismay, he kind of stabs them in the back. He betrays them. Martin Luther, instead of like supporting them, he calls on German princes to, crush these rebellions, and they get crushed violently, like very violently. And because Martin Luther's eyes, he might be, rebelling against the church, Catholic Church, and all that, but in his eyes, the power structure of Europe is like set up because that's the way God meant it. But so Martin Luther, he splits off from the church and begins the whole Protestant Reformation. But when one domino falls, the whole thing goes down. And so there's division in the Reformation. And so I want to get into one of these. I'm going to do my best to pronounce this. Zwinglianism. There we go. That right there. The Z word right there. So Zwinglianism, whatever, was founded by this guy named Ulrich Zwingli. There we go, in Switzerland. And so he disagrees with Martin Luther over the sacrament of communion. So he agrees on Martin Luther with a lot of things except for communion. So in Catholic Church, typical Catholic Church, you go at the end of Mass, at the end of church, one of the big things that you do is you go up and you get the little piece of bread and you get the wine. And so Catholic belief is the bread is the body of Christ and the wine is the blood of Christ. And this comes from the story of the Last Supper in the Bible. So in Catholic beliefs and in Luther's beliefs, this is believed to be literal. This literally is the body of Christ. This literally is the blood of Christ. Well, Ulrich, he's kind of reading, and he disagrees. He believes he believes when that was written in the Bible, that was meant figuratively, like this piece of bread represents Jesus' body, this wine represents his blood, but it's not really his body. It's not really his blood. And the reason, and this, his movement doesn't get as wide of traction as Martin Luther's movement and as some other movements, but it's still important because this is his belief, that the body and the blood are not literally the body and blood, like it's figurative. This becomes a popular Protestant belief. I know Methodists, Baptists, and several others. A lot of Protestants nowadays, they still believe this. And what's so powerful about this is like, Martin Luther, Luther Bible, it's being widely printed. You can read the Bible for yourself. Well, now it's open for interpretation. And this is one of those examples. Ulrich reads the Bible, studies it, and his interpretation of it is Jesus didn't really mean this is literally my body, this is really my blood. Just figure of speech. Another one of the big movements, Reformation, another one of the big Protestant movements is Calvinism. And it's founded by John Calvin. And this movement is born out of the last movement, Zwinglianism. I'll never be able to pronounce that. But it's born out of that movement as well. So, John Calvin, he agreed with Martin Luther on many things, including communion. He believed it's literally the body and blood of Christ. He agreed with him on that. But he disagrees on the idea of salvation. So, John Calvin, he comes up with the idea of predestination. So he believes that God has already predetermined who will be saved and who will be damned. So, this kind of idea, God is all powerful. He sees everything. He sees the future. He knows what's going to happen. And so kind of like because of that, he's already decided who's going to make it to heaven, who won't. And then finally, the final movement we'll cover today is the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. And this story is, me personally, I find almost hilarious just because. So the Anglican Church, it's born strictly for political reasons. Lutheranism is born out of a religious disagreement in the scriptures. Same thing with Zwinglianism and Calvinism. Well, the Anglican Church, the Church of England, it's born literally for political reasons. So the story goes, King Henry VIII, he is married to Catherine of Aragon. And, he's married to her and they have a daughter together. Well, if you're king, you want a son. You want that male heir. You want to have that male heir to take the throne after you. And well, she can't give him a son. Well, she gave him a daughter, but it's not a son. So because of this, he wants a divorce. Well, according to the Catholic Church, marriage is for life. Like you don't get divorced. So he asked the Pope for an annulment. He's asking the Pope for annulment. He's wanting out of this marriage so he can go marry somebody else, and hopefully she'll give him a son. And he grows tired of waiting, so he goes to his own church officials in England to try to speed things along. And then eventually, in 1534, upon his own request, Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, which declared that King Henry was the supreme head of the Church of England. So they kind of, they break away from the Catholic Church, and they break away from the Catholic Church and form, Church of England. And it's funny because look, outside perspective looking in, it's very similar to the Catholic Church doctrine wise, except now instead of the Pope being the head of the church, it's King Henry VIII. It would be the King of England or the Queen of England. And still to this day, it's a trend that still happens. Queen Elizabeth of England right now, she's still at the head of the Anglican Church. And this kind of starts, this starts the whole thing. The monarchy will be the head of the church. And the funny thing is he ends up having 6 different wives and never gets a son. Eventually, his daughter Elizabeth will eventually become Queen Elizabeth I, and she'll become Queen of England. Let's move on. All right, so now time, the fun part. So I got a little assignment for you. So I got 2 different links here. So if you click here, it's this will take you. So we're going to analyze the 95 Thesis. So Martin Luther's 95 Thesis. So if you click here, should take you to a Google Doc. So here, I have some selected excerpts from the 95 thesis. So I want, like, you can look at it here, and I got the questions down here. But I want you to answer the questions in the Google form. That way, like, I can kind of see what y'all thinking. But click on that first link. This will take you to the Google Doc where you can kind of see, sections from the 95 thesis. Let's go back. Then if you click on that link right there, so this is where I want you to answer it. So it's got all the same questions from the Google Docs, from the actual Google Doc. And I got in the Google form. I want you to answer them all just right here. And shouldn't be that hard. I just want y'all to get used to like analyzing, primary source documents. Kind of what's Martin Luther's, motivations for it, what's he trying to say, all that. But it shouldn't be too hard. And that's the end of our lesson today. I hope y'all learned something. I think the Protestant Reformation is fascinating. And I hope all y'all have a good day. Y'all take care.